A child lies in bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling as shadows crawl across the walls. The faint glow of a nightlight is not enough to keep the imagination at bay. Every creak of the house feels like footsteps. Every shifting shadow could be the outline of something waiting in the dark. The little heart races, the body stiffens, and in that quiet moment, the terror feels larger than life itself. Most of us can remember such nights, when the world seemed too big and too mysterious, when the safety of daylight felt like the only salvation. Perhaps you remember clutching the blanket tighter, whispering to yourself that it was only a dream, only your mind playing tricks. Yet even with the comfort of reason, the fear remained. Now the question arises, what if these fears never truly began in childhood at all? What if the monsters under the bed, the terror of drowning in the deep end of a pool, the dread of being left alone, were not born from imagination, but from echoes that trailed behind you long before you ever drew your first breath? Edgar Cayce, the man often called the sleeping prophet, believed that the soul carries unfinished business from life to life. He suggested that the fears we hold as children are often not random, not mere quirks of an overactive mind, but whispers from another existence, imprints that remain until they are healed. Think for a moment of your own life. Do you remember a fear that made no sense at all, yet clung to you with a grip stronger than logic? Perhaps you were terrified of heights, even though you had never fallen, or you shivered at the thought of deep water, despite never once facing danger in it. Maybe the sound of thunder shook you more than it should, or the thought of being left alone left an ache in your chest that words could not describe. These fears do not always vanish with age. Often they transform, slipping quietly into the patterns of adult life. The child afraid of the dark may grow into the adult who cannot rest in silence, always leaving the television on for company. The child who trembled at separation may grow into the adult who fears abandonment in relationships, unable to trust that love will remain. Cayce described these as more than quirks of psychology. He saw them as the remnants of lives we once lived, fragments of memory that remain until acknowledged. He called this the soul's unfinished business, the burdens carried forward because the lesson was not yet complete. For the soul, time is not linear, and the echoes of old experiences often seep into the present, shaping us in ways we seldom understand. This is where the journey begins, not in judgment of our fears, but in recognition of them. They are not signs of weakness, but doorways. Each fear we carry, whether the dread of falling, the panic of being alone, or the trembling that comes in silence, is an invitation to look deeper. They are threads in a larger tapestry, guiding us back to truths we have long forgotten, but never fully escaped. The fears of childhood may seem simple on the surface, yet when we look closer, they hold a peculiar weight. Fear of heights, for instance, often begins with nothing more than a child standing on a balcony looking down and feeling the knees weaken at the sheer distance between the body and the earth. No fall ever took place, no danger ever arrived, and yet the heart pounds as though death itself waits below. This fear lingers for many into adulthood, preventing them from climbing mountains, stepping onto glass platforms, or even trusting the safety of an airplane. It shapes choices, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in life-defining ways, and no one can ever quite explain why. Then there is the fear of darkness, perhaps the most universal of them all. To a child, the absence of light is not merely the absence of sight. It is the return of uncertainty, the mind's canvas where imagination paints its most dreadful pictures. Monsters in the closet, footsteps in the hall, whispers that seem to come from nowhere. The dark amplifies them all. Adults often laugh it off, saying it is only a stage, yet many grow into people who still leave a light on at night, who still feel uneasy walking alone after sunset, who cannot rest when shadows gather. The fear of drowning has its own mystery. A child may panic at swimming lessons, unable to place their face in water, choking on breath even in the shallow end where no danger exists. This unease may grow into adulthood, where even the sight of the ocean stirs anxiety. People speak of it as irrational, but to the one who feels it, the sensation is undeniably real, as if memory itself lies beneath the waves. And what of abandonment? For some, the deepest fear is not of heights or darkness, but of being left alone. A parent stepping out of the room may trigger tears that feel like heartbreak. Loneliness becomes more than an inconvenience. It becomes a quiet torment, echoing through relationships and shaping the story of love and loss. What unites these fears is not only their intensity, but the way they endure. They mature as we mature, changing masks but never fully disappearing. The fear of heights may resurface as hesitation before new opportunities, the fear of darkness as avoidance of solitude, the fear of drowning as the inability to surrender or let go, the fear of abandonment as anxiety that pushes people away even while longing for closeness. Each one follows us like a shadow, speaking in a language older than words, guiding and limiting, protecting and imprisoning. Cayce suggested that these shadows are not accidents of personality, nor are they failures of strength. They are keys. They point toward wounds that were never healed, stories that were never completed, lives that still echo in the corridors of the soul. When viewed through this lens, the monsters under the bed are no longer imaginary. They are messengers. They are fragments of truth, urging us to listen, to seek, to remember. Edgar Cayce often described the human soul as a traveler, moving from one life to another, carrying with it not only the wisdom gained, but also the wounds unhealed. According to his vision, life is not a single story with a beginning and an end, but a series of chapters written across centuries. And in these chapters, certain events leave impressions so deep, so charged with emotion, that they echo into future incarnations. These echoes often appear as what we call irrational fears. Take, for example, the fear of water. Many people, even those who live far from the sea, find themselves terrified at the thought of swimming or unable to step into a boat without panic rising in their chest. Cayce spoke of souls who had drowned in previous lives, perhaps in shipwrecks, floods, or battles on rivers and seas. Though the body of this life has never known such trauma, the soul remembers. The memory remains etched in the deeper layers of being, surfacing whenever water surrounds the person again. What looks like an unreasonable phobia may in fact be a warning call from the past, a memory that refuses to be silenced until it is healed. The same can be said for the fear of fire. Some children tremble at the sight of candles or shy away from fireplaces with no logical reason. Cayce suggested that these fears may come from past experiences of violent endings, perhaps from a home consumed in flames, or lives ended in times of war and destruction. The soul, carrying the imprint of fire's fury, reacts with dread even when no real danger exists. In this way, trauma is not locked in the past, but lives on in the present, shaping choices and emotions. He also spoke of fears linked to persecution. Imagine the unease that swells within a person when speaking before a crowd. For some, it is more than shyness. It is terror that steals the voice, shakes the body, and floods the mind with dread. Cayce revealed that such reactions may stem from lifetimes where truth was punished, where speaking one's beliefs led to ridicule, exile, or even death. The soul remembers the cost of being seen, and so the body trembles when the stage appears. What the world calls stage fright may in fact be the memory of persecution reborn. Even the fear of abandonment has its roots in this tapestry of memory. Cayce described how many souls carry forward the ache of betrayal or loss, experiences of being left behind in other lives. These unresolved emotions surface early in childhood, when even a moment of separation feels unbearable. As the child grows, the wound transforms, becoming the adult who fears rejection, the lover who clings too tightly, or the friend who struggles to trust. The pain of being left once is carried forward, echoing through the centuries, until it is acknowledged and released. For Cayce, these patterns were not meant to condemn, but to guide. He saw every irrational fear as a signpost, pointing to unfinished business the soul has carried into this life for healing. Where psychology often speaks of conditioning and trauma within one lifetime, Cayce lifted the veil wider, reminding us that the soul has a history that reaches far beyond the cradle. He urged people to see their fears not as accidents, but as opportunities for redemption, for choosing differently, for completing what was left undone. Consider how this changes the way we view ourselves. Instead of seeing fear as weakness, it becomes a map. The woman who trembles on a bridge may be confronting a fall she once endured. The man who cannot stand the silence of night may be reliving a time when darkness hid real danger. The child who cries when left alone may be carrying the loneliness of lifetimes past. Each fear is a message, written in the language of memory, asking us to look deeper into who we are and who we have been. Cayce's readings often revealed that healing is not simply about conquering a fear, but about understanding its origin. Once the soul recognizes where the fear comes from, transformation becomes possible. The fear of water becomes not just something to endure, but an invitation to honor the memory of what was lost. The fear of fire becomes a reminder of the fragility of life and the need for respect of its forces. The fear of abandonment becomes the chance to rediscover inner wholeness, to realize that no soul is ever truly alone. This lens is both mystical and practical. Mystical because it acknowledges the unseen history of the soul. Practical because it provides meaning to struggles that otherwise seem senseless. When a fear arises, Cayce would not have us ask, "Why am I so weak?" but rather, "What part of my soul is asking for healing?" It is a radical shift, one that moves us from shame into curiosity, from avoidance into growth. While Edgar Cayce spoke of ancient echoes within the soul, modern psychology points us toward the fragile figure of the inner child. This inner child is not just a poetic idea. It represents the collection of early impressions, memories, and emotional wounds formed in our first years of life. Think of the child who was left alone in a dark room. That moment of isolation may have lasted only minutes, but to a young mind, it feels like an eternity of abandonment. Years later, the adult may still carry a restless fear of loneliness or an anxious attachment in relationships. In Cayce's terms, such a child may be re-experiencing the grief of prior lifetimes. In psychological terms, they are carrying unresolved trauma within the subconscious. The language differs, but the truth aligns. Wounds do not vanish with time. They sink deeper. Consider the fear of heights. Modern therapists often encounter patients who feel dizzy, shaky, or filled with panic when near an edge. Some explanations point to evolutionary survival instincts. But Cayce saw more. He described souls who once suffered falls, accidents, or deaths from high places. Now compare that to a child who once slipped from a tree or was frightened on a tall balcony. Even without past life context, the child's nervous system recorded the terror. As an adult, this memory may linger as an irrational, visceral fear. Both perspectives reveal the same principle. Trauma, whether ancient or recent, remains alive within us until it is faced. The inner child carries not only fear, but also unmet needs. Cayce often emphasized love, kindness, and compassion as the greatest forces of healing. Modern therapy echoes this through the practice of reparenting, learning to give the inner child the safety and affirmation it once lacked. When we hold space for the child within us, when we soothe the part of ourselves that trembles, we begin the process of breaking the cycle. Healing, then, is not about erasing fear, but about embracing the frightened child and guiding them into trust. Take stage fright as another example. Cayce linked it to lifetimes where speaking one's truth led to punishment. Psychology, meanwhile, often roots it in childhood moments of shaming, being laughed at in class, scolded for speaking out of turn, or ignored when trying to express something important. In both cases, the child learns it is not safe to be seen. The result? A grown adult with a pounding heart and trembling hands whenever the spotlight turns their way. The irrational fear is simply the inner child, or perhaps the soul itself, crying out, reminding us of what once felt unbearable. The beauty of bridging Cayce with psychology is that it gives us two mirrors to look into. One reveals the timeless journey of the soul, the other the delicate landscape of our earliest years. And when the reflections overlap, we discover something profound. The fears we carry are not failures. They are signals, evidence that a part of us, whether born in this life or another, still waits to be heard. Even Cayce's insistence on love as the ultimate healer finds resonance here. Psychologists today recognize that compassion, whether directed inward or received from another, rewires the nervous system. To sit with the inner child, to whisper gently that the danger is over, is a form of the same healing Cayce described, releasing the soul from chains it no longer needs to carry. This unmasking of the inner child reframes fear itself. Instead of being a curse, fear becomes a bridge. It connects our adult consciousness to the child who still hides in the shadows. It connects this lifetime to all the lifetimes that may have come before. Each trembling heartbeat, each anxious thought becomes an invitation to turn inward, to listen, and to heal. Edgar Cayce believed that no fear exists without a remedy, for every shadow contains its opposite light. The purpose of fear is not to paralyze but to awaken. The trembling hands, the racing heartbeat, the sudden dread that seems to come from nowhere. All of these are signals that the soul is calling for remembrance and release. In his readings, Cayce often emphasized that healing begins within. Meditation, he said, is not an escape, but a way of entering the deeper chambers of the soul, where memories long forgotten can surface like ripples on a quiet lake. Sitting in silence with the breath, one may suddenly recall a dream, an image, or a sensation that points directly to the source of a fear. For Cayce, dreams themselves were sacred pathways. He encouraged people to keep journals by their bedside, to write upon waking before the details faded. Many who feared water, for example, recorded dreams of storm-tossed seas or sinking ships. These dreams were not punishments, but reminders that the soul was asking to be seen, to be honored, to be healed. And then there was forgiveness, the balm that Cayce believed could heal across lifetimes. Forgiveness was not only for others, but also for the self, for the part of us that stumbled, the part that held on to fear for too long, the part that once suffered and could not let go. To forgive is to release chains we have carried for centuries. Modern therapy echoes this wisdom in its own language. Inner child work, trauma healing, and gentle self-compassion all mirror what Cayce taught, that the soul responds to kindness. The frightened child within us, or the scarred memory of another life, softens not through force, but through love. To whisper to oneself, "You are safe now," is to begin the work of transformation. And what happens when we answer these fears with patience instead of judgment? They begin to shift. A fear of drowning may lead one to learn swimming, not out of defiance, but as a gentle act of reclaiming trust. A fear of public speaking may, with practice and self-kindness, reveal a gift for expression once hidden. Fear, in this way, becomes the soil where courage takes root. This is the soul's journey forward, not to erase fear entirely, but to transmute it. Cayce taught that every fear hides a fragment of memory waiting to be redeemed. Each step we take toward facing our fear is a step toward wholeness, toward remembering that we are far more than the shadows that haunt us. So perhaps the next time you feel that old familiar dread rising within you, you might pause and ask, not, "Why me?" but, "What is this teaching me?" In that question lies your freedom. Because in truth, your fears are not punishments from the universe. They are invitations to grow, to heal, and to reclaim the strength that has always been yours. And maybe, just maybe, the fear that has followed you all your life is not your enemy, but the key that unlocks the next chapter of your soul's eternal story.